Calling all pitchers and pitching coaches, PitchDoc 2024 is your destination for revolutionary pitching education and information, from the newest technology to advances in biomechanics knowledge to take-home strategies and application for making your pitchers better today. Join us August 8th and 9th at the Westin O'Hare in Chicago. Experience transformative sessions led by leaders from the college game to technology companies to player development experts. Use promo code OGX Podcast to take an extra 10% off. Visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchdoc. Again, visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchdoc and use code OGX Podcast to take an additional 10% off. Spots are limited, so secure yours today. All right, back for another episode. This time, I am not in Oklahoma City, sadly. But we're going to start with talking about the World Series so far. Obviously, this is Thursday, so tonight will be day 2 of the championship series. Maybe we'll just hold our thoughts in the championship series and just talk about the World Series leading up to it and any thoughts we had on how the series went. And what are some thoughts? I saw someone put something, I do think it's interesting, kind of take is there was, I think it was Rhiannon who writes for D1 softball, but she wrote that there was so much use of staff, but now when it comes down to it, everyone's going with their number one. And I think that is an interesting take. So I'd be curious some of your thoughts on the prep for something. Yesterday, I said we weren't going to talk about the championship series, but yesterday they were saying it was the first time Maxwell threw back-to-back days the whole year. So I think that's interesting. And what maybe prep goes into this sort of switch to just it's you or no one kind of mindset, I think is interesting. So that I think was an interesting take. I think the difference between it's during the World Series, every game was either a 1-0 just full on forever pitchers duel or a
run rule
or an 8-7 or it just was so it just didn't feel like there were many. I can't even think, were there any games that were in the middle? It was these two kind of extremes. That was interesting. Maybe that goes to this idea of riding one pitcher. I don't know, but yeah, maybe start there. What are thoughts? I thought the pitching thing is interesting for sure.
Yeah, I would say the thoughts are that we're really watching some remarkable pitching performances. And I think that, the highlights to me so far and the teams that have survived, it has come down to unbelievable defensive plays, particularly in the outfield. I have never in my life seen just so many
crazy outfield plays.
Unbelievable outfield plays, which is just awesome. I just think it's
so cool.
Such a defense, is not I don't know, hitting and pitching seem to be the two elements that we're always talking about in the game. But when it comes down to it, the soul of the game is on defense. And so there's just been so much excitement, I think, around that. And then I think we have witnessed some remarkable pitching performances. And at the end of the day, I always say when you get into postseason, you need some magic. We saw people win in super regionals who just had a little more magic than some other teams. And I think that starts in the circle. You're watching pitchers just deliver unbelievable performances. So I think Rock, what she did out there was amazing. I mean, she pitched day after day after day against some of the best hitters in the country, was competing. It's not that she has so much variability in what she throws. So, command of what she was doing, her competitive, spirit was just we really witnessed something amazing there. Nyjah Kennedy, outside of her first day, I think she threw some. When you watch her, you think she's the best. Yep. I mean, when she throws her best, it's so obvious that she's the best. She's something different. She's something special. I think that Tegan, going into the championship series when they beat Stanford, she had an unbelievable game. And you just think it's so obvious or you can sometimes overlook she threw a great game, she's a great pitcher, but what it's like to be a freshman on a stage like that and for her to deliver a performance like that. I think we have seen some really, really incredible, and honestly, Maxwell's throwing great right now. So I just think
the Oklahoma State Florida game to kick it off. When we were watching that, I was this is old school. This is some old school softball, just 0-0, lost it on 1 home run. It's just crazy and really sad that it pushed them into that, because she pitched her freaking ass off that game and just like literally one home run. That's how it goes. But I thought that was crazy. I was thinking as you were talking, and then you referenced Kennedy's first game. One feedback, the announcers seem to be relying a lot on the synergy and 643 data, which I posted a little bit about on Twitter, a little more rhetorically. I think I knew what data they were relying on, but I do think it's interesting because I think that game can get a little dangerous when we start saying people are throwing certain pitches at certain percentages based on coaching tagging it or locations, that we say like, you know, Susie really hits the rise ball well. It's like based on the location and coaches tagging it. And the reason I really, because it's the announcers, because so many people are watching, because we take that as fact, because it's like data being presented as like, you know, fact. And we know there's so many issues already with like labeling in our game and things like that. Like, I really don't like that. In addition to that, did Kennedy not throw good against Texas, or did Texas just have a good game plan that game?
Right.
I think I was at that game. I saw the thing. She was throwing low 70s. She seemed to have command of her changeup. Like, she struck out Katie on a changeup that game. Like, I think Texas just beat her that game. And so I also, like, every time Kennedy threw, we kept referencing the first game. And I was like, based on what did she not throw good? The outcome? Do we have data that her data looked different? Was her velo down? Was her command different? Like, I don't think
Krista,
so.
You know what I think I think a lot about that whenever someone gets, whenever someone hits a home run, that they always reference.
It was over the middle.
She missed on that pitch.
She missed it. Yeah.
She missed it. It had to have been a miss. And I think it was Kelly Inouye Perez said, they were like, you know, besides that one pitch, I think it was Holly Rowe, just like, she's been doing so great, but like besides that one pitch. And Kelly said, like, actually that pitch they hit out was a great pitch. She just made, you know,
well,
like,
it's like they have the Yakrtech data. They have the Yakrtech data, which they're using for exit velo. So it's like, I'm not expecting yet that our game is at a place where the announcers can like instantly reference the Yakrtech, but it would be interesting to know. And like, why can't we put that out there? Did Kennedy throw differently? Like in baseball.
It is possible too, though, Krista. It is possible that she did, right? Because what we see is that
we don't know.
Right. We don't know. She had some fatigue. We could have been seeing that, like, okay, she was, you know, that.
But in super regionals, her velo was down, and it wasn't because I saw it. It was, you know, at the game, and it was in the low 70s. So it wasn't down that first game against Texas. I just think it's interesting. Like, okay, if in baseball someone has a game where they're like, oh man, this is MLB, and they get hammered, we can go and look. And so sometimes, definitely, either they were down in velo, break was different, like something happened and they lost something in that, or were like they were getting tipped. So I think the game, like the Phillies Cardinals game, was it Phillies Cardinals? I'm almost positive, like a couple years ago, and the Cardinals picked up something on the pitcher and just hammered him. And so no one was like, what a terrible game he had. Everyone was like, what happened? And you watch, like what the announcers talked about is the Cardinals would come in each time and they were like lifting their leg. He was tipping something. Mm-hmm. And so I just think it's interesting. Like we do have that information. There is Yakrtech on the field at the World Series. And so this is why information like that would be so helpful, that as a pitcher, I don't have to feel like when the outcome is bad, like, oh shit, I did terrible. Maybe you didn't. Mm-hmm. And the team just freaking beat you. Yep. Or maybe you did. And can we attack specifically what you did differently in that game with the data and the information? If your data was exactly the same and you just got hit, now as a coach, I can go say like, well, how did Texas hit her? Right. What did they have? What were they targeting? How can I how can I attack them differently? But if the data was different, whether, like I said, that was velo, break, something was different, like we have that information. So mm-hmm. I obviously
it's the same concept, Krista, of like the old school mindset of pitching is that like if someone throws an entire game and by the third time through the lineup they get hit, it's because they weren't tough enough. They weren't resilient enough. Like the old school like commentators, you know, like the old school concepts are really about just like you need to train harder to handle those situations. It never goes to the like, did your stuff get worse by that time because of fatigue, or was your stuff the same and the hitters were just on it by that time they saw it enough? Like that's it's the same concept. And so it's basically this concept of like, everything goes back to toughness. So what they kept saying about Nyjah is that like the next day she comes back. And now there is an element of where she does.
Right.
She seems like when she loses, she does seem to tap into something that is like not, it's just like in deep inside of her soul that makes her seem superhuman. That's an amazing quality in her, right? And something that will not show up in the Acrotech data. However, it becomes this like she wasn't stomping on the first day, so she lost.
Right.
And the second day she started to stomp, and then that's why she was better. It's very much like this. It's a very old school mindset, and it makes pitchers feel as if you don't do well, it's always on you.
And maybe that was true. Maybe she played tighter the first game, but what was the result of that?
Yeah,
like, and we can get that information. So I think that is hard. Like, just, you know, also, can I just say, high spin rate does not make you have late sharp break.
Nope.
So if we could just high spin rate, let's just talk through that for a second. High spin rate makes the ball hold position longer.
Correct.
In most cases, when we with what we are talking about. So when we're talking about Maxwell, her high spin rate. Now, if she has down high spin, I don't know. We probably have access to her data somewhere, but doesn't matter. But if you have high spin rate down, which you can only have so high of spin rate down, but you are on the higher end of down spin rate, yes, that gets more break. It's not later or sharper. It's more because the more spins feed into the break. If you have high spin rate up, which is this, I assume what someone like a Rothrock has or a Tegan Kavan has, that doesn't make it late or sharp or nothing. It makes it no break or maybe a little up. And that's what's tricky about it, is that you're expecting the ball to come down because that's what we're used to, and it doesn't. So yesterday when she was like, she has high RPNs, which really feeds into that late sharp break. I'm like, no, let's see. In almost every case, that's the opposite. So
and it just depends. I mean, it just depends on like the direction in which it's spinning. So what you're referencing, Krista, is like, if it's like, what we know is that bullet really plays. It plays particularly at high spin rate for that reason. This bullet high spin rate that holds the zone is like what is really,
and high velo.
High spin rate, high velo.
High velo.
High spin rate.
High velo, exactly right. So I think like, but if someone has high spin rate and they have a spin direction, essentially their efficiency, then it's going to contribute to more break. But there's just so many, it's just like kind of like a, I don't know, elementary view of it, which I don't know, maybe not really an elementary view. It's kind of a false view. We're fine with people delivering data and messages about data that are more elementary.
Simple.
Because you know what?
You're right.
Yeah,
that's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear all the,
Exactly. Well, technically, if there was more spin efficiencies, no one gives a shit.
But what I don't like is that when I take an intro call with someone and they're like, I'm just trying to get more late sharp break. Like,
I've seen that comment come through 2 sales calls, and I'm just like, I think it's so critical that the announcers know how much of an influence they have on that.
Right. It's the voice of our game.
Yes.
You know, it's the voice of our game.
And to misconstrue the basic physics of it it's tough. And that language gets pervasive, right? Again, you have these kids are like, oh, I keep hearing about late sharp break.
Backdoor curve, late sharp break.
Right. My spin rates are great because I went to a camp and I saw my spin rates. And then it's like, we get them in our facility and like everything looks the same because spin direction is not something that gets reported to them and is understood by them. And it's just like, there's such a profusion of that language from the announcers.
I'm kind of thinking of, I like to walk both sides of it. I love the old school element of the game. There's something about the old school element of the game that I just feel like it's so pure, it's so great. The people that laid the foundation for the game, you can't help but like love them, and just feel like really grateful and think about being like a young kid looking up to them, and you know, and it's, all that is real. It kind of reminds me of when we're like, it's hard for coaches. Like there's some element, if you're a coach in the game now, the tactics, the techniques, the strategies utilized then, you have to keep growing in order to stay with it. But it is asking coaches a lot. It's like asking them to now be like, have a different type of brain than what they've relied on for decades. And so there's some element of like, we need to push the people that are communicating about the game, educating about the game on the game's greatest stage to grow a little bit, but also like not unrealistically. You can't expect people, instead what they really need to have is someone else added to that like table who is purely there to like deliver some sense of like StatCast type of, you know, like commentary to really deliver that. Obviously, then that requires then us being okay with like showing what that looks like.
Right. Well, it's like you have to be careful with saying 70 exit velo is elite. So 73, whoa. It's like every
Right.
single ball that was hit well was over 70. So, I just think
Yeah.
like we're putting data in front of the analysts for the first time the past 2 years.
Right, they're
And
trying
so
to talk about it, but it's
we
above
need-
the skill sets.
Yes. And so like there
Yeah.
needs to be some information fed of like, if we're going to use that data, let's be careful with it, right? Including not just ball flight data, but synergy and 643 and all of this other information out there, which is amazing information, but just saying as though it's fact. Kelly Maxwell throws her rise now 40% of the time. I don't know about that. Let's be very careful using that because that's based off of
An internal label.
it's based off of Oklahoma labeling that appropriately, which they might intentionally they would never do that, but they might intentionally mess up. And there would be or it's based off of someone else tagging that just based off of height. Like there's no systems right now in place for synergy where there's standards of tagging. And so that is it's not based off of it's always a label. So even if there were standards in place, it would be a label based off of location or whatever.
Right.
What we know even from the way like we have experience of pro athletes that had systems in place at AU, for instance, that just purely by location things were getting tagged. And they're like, I don't even have that pitch. And I'm getting, told that I throw that. So I think when we're using information like that, especially when it sounds so objective, like she throws this 22% of the time, like it sounds like woo, look at this stat we have. This is obviously objective. We got to know what it's based off of, and we got to be able to at least talk about it. That's a cool stat to use, but let's be careful about it.
Yeah, here's a good example, Krista.
Yeah.
They kept showing for Nyjah her like heat maps for when she was throwing. She won that game. It's kind of like pulling all this together.
Right, but
She
like
was
lefty
up in that
versus
top
righty.
right quadrant, and then her heat map, the game she lost was lower, but it's like that
Maybe that was the
literally doesn't.
approach.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah,
was the
that could have been the approach. It's also of like what was even going on there. We're assuming that those pitches are the same pitches, but she was just missing, It could
Right.
have been the approach. It could have also been that like maybe there's an element where when she just throws 73, 74 bullet up in the zone, that's her most effective games when that's where she relies on, but we don't know that. In reality, I'm sure there were plenty of games where she won, where she was tapping into a great break profile, whatever that was like lower in the zone at this speed. Like there's just no context to any of it. It's just like she won, she lost. Here's where she threw most of her pitches. Here where she threw. So obviously that's bad. And I think of like, but what if we literally pulled tons of games she won where she relied on going inside
Right.
the righties with XYZ pitch? It's just like that's the kind of stuff. But no
Yeah.
one would. Yeah.
Yeah.
We think like that. I don't know how much the average viewer thinks like that, but as what we're saying is that, but people they want to get in the world of education and data, and so this is sometimes the exposure they have to it, and we're like, damn.
Right.
Bummer.
Hey, maybe next season we need to start our own stream, maybe a game a week, and we
I know.
commentate.
I
think
actually
that would
thought
be
about
fantastic.
I thought about announcing it just like, because they do that in MLB. Sometimes they have the StatCast
Yeah.
and they just like, now we don't have any of that.
We don't have the
information. So
data.
we'd be like, based
So-
on our freaking
Yeah.
eye, this
No
looks
freaking clue. But yeah. Also,
Yeah.
the other day we were
So
watching.
that
a
might
game, my
not be
husband
good.
was
That
like,
would
I
be
feel like
bad.
you would be good at commentating. I'm like, is that a joke? I would be like screaming. You guys know the other day, Duke's first game, we were in here. They hit that solo shot to start. I just ran, found the nearest heavy object to throw it across the room and like lose it, Happy Gilmore style. I'm
Well,
like,
definitely
"Are you
our
kidding me? I would be out of
our
control.
think it'd
stream
be
would
like-
be interesting.
I'm proposing that for next season. I'm proposing that we have some setup where we are.
Maybe we can make a partnership with Yacker Tech and we can get the
something.
data.
It's like who is it that does the is it the Manning brothers that do like would they commentate over a game?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like I like
right.
something like
Well,
that.
they had during the women's basketball, they had who was it? Some
Oh,
vets
Diana
that
Taurasi,
did like
yeah,
right.
those
Yeah,
guys.
they did something like that. That's fun too.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
more like social, like which is it's
Yeah.
more like funny, but
Yeah.
yeah. We
No,
would
I have no interest in watching these high profile games with big stakes. The way I watch them is if my life depends on it. Even though I'm
No,
like, I
right.
have to remind myself 12 times as I'm sitting on my couch, like, your life will change zero based on the outcome of
I'm
this.
still
But
recovering
in
from
that
my
moment, I literally think like the world is like on my shoulders. That's how I watch games. I don't know why. That's always been in me. There is no way I could just report on an even keeled Oh my God, that would be.
You wouldn't have been able to
disaster.
be Amanda Scarborough at your alma mater and just
No,
stayed like
kudos to
totally
her.
neutral.
Kudos
Yeah.
to her, man, to try to
Yeah.
keep her bias out of it. That is,
Yeah,
I'm
Yeah,
still
they
recovering
did a great
from
job.
my,
I actually thought
my
Amanda and Kevin did a great job that series.
they did. They were funny. The trash thing
Mhm.
was really funny. Me and my
Yeah.
husband were cracking up during that.
I'm still
Yeah.
recovering from the stress of the Texas A&M series. I'm still recovering from that. Like
Yeah.
that was 2 weeks ago, and I'm still recovering from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna
Anyway,
transition into the.
Wait, I want to say one thing
Yeah,
Krista, before
go
we
for it.
switch over. The concept of like, I want to go into like pitcher management, what we always
Yeah.
talk about.
Oh,
of
yeah.
This
Yeah, we
concept
did.
of like
Yeah.
pitchers being like you said, Kelly Maxwell had not been used back to back games. I think, something I thought about with Nyjah Kennedy, like she is good enough to beat anybody. There is no doubt about it that their inability to manage her workload throughout the year, like what she is doing in February, March, and April, it matters. Just what she's doing in game, but also between games, like that matters of whether or not and I'm not saying they didn't make it because she didn't have enough gas in the tanker. I'm not saying like anything along those lines, but the reality is that this idea of for softball pitching, what we have this luxury of being able to do is to be able to throw like back to back to back to back. Kelly Maxwell is arguably going to throw 3-4 days in a row and just go for it, right? And she's not going to get like injured because of that. Very unlikely,
Yeah.
right? It's just like that's where this element of the motion allows us to do things like that versus overhand throwing in baseball. However, what we have really mistaken that as is that she can throw every single game all year long. And what we now know is that the chronic fatigue impacts pitchers from a standpoint of potentially command, certainly velocity, break profile. They can't sustain that versions of themselves. Pain, their health and wellness, of course. So I just think that like what you're talking about when people have been managing their pitchers since February for this moment. That's what it's about. They are making decisions on how to make sure their chronic workload throughout this really long 5-month season, essentially 4-month season, is allowing them to have a full tank and then just freaking sprint and go for it at the end when it matters the most. So that's really where we've gotten confused, I think, in the pitching world, because you can do that. Doesn't mean that you should throughout an extended period of time, because then it kind of, comes back to bite you a little bit. But
Yeah.
it's hard to think like,
And baseball and softball injuries are different.
Right.
Like I think the pitching mindset of like it's more natural. We had this conversation in OKC. Some of the young coaches that were at the convention or the conference that they host were asking some questions about this, and it's like injuries are more hidden, they're more chronic, they're more based on patterns over time. In that way, they're more avoidable. So it gets more frustrating to us, which is like we could be avoiding a lot of these things if we approach younger ages appropriately, if we saw the pattern issues, if we manage workload at an earlier age. Because this isn't like, it's not no injuries are like this, but it's very unlikely that you're just throwing and you tear your UCL. Like this is not, it's something, there's more build up to it versus there's also like, I think it takes a little more time for things to come down. So if I'm a baseball pitcher and I threw 120 pitches and I came back, we would see a big down, I think a lot more than you would see on the softball side of velo and things like that. And then also because we know a lot of the injuries are like, you see it, they throw and it's like, it's that fatigue leads to some immediate thing. So I think that's the difference. And so it's like, yes, now they can do this. Let's not all freak out at this point that they're pitching a lot of volume. Right. Now they can. It's about what
but
led
had Maxwell
up to
done
this.
it, had she done it all throughout the
Would she
season,
be pitching
you would not
this
be
good?
witnessing the performances
Right.
that you're seeing right now. And you
Right.
saw that with some other, staffs. I think it's just sort of like there is an element, and sometimes you don't have the luxury. So
Right.
to even have the opportunity to get there, if you don't have the staff, you're not going to win the games to even get on
Right.
the stage. So it's obviously this weird balance. And when we're working with coaches from a consulting standpoint, this is the balance we're trying to take. It's like, you've got to do enough in the season to make it to the stage, but you also have to, once you get there, have something in the tank left to be able
Right.
to then.
Once you
enough,
get
go
there, a
for
lot
it.
of them have
Mhm.
one kid that's like, this is the kid that's going to beat everyone. So
For
like
sure.
at this point, that makes sense. I mean, you want
Right.
your
Which
best.
is what,
and
honestly, which is what makes Texas so, like, just, I mean, their depth is unbelievable, and they do have multiple tools. So yeah, I think it's like that is what makes them a really like favorable candidate to win it.
Yeah.
is that they have options. They're not like literally relying on a single element of their game
Yeah.
or a single athlete to produce. They
In
have
this
they have a lot of
series-
depth.
In the series, Texas lost the first game and won the
Right.
last two. So
Right.
here we go.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, really quick, moving on to yesterday, 2 days ago, I don't know. Athletes Unlimited announced that next season they're going to start a traditional model. So I believe next season it's going to be like a traveling. When I read it, I was picturing like a traveling softball circus. That's what it sounds like. But it's going to I think it's 4 teams next year, and they're going to travel. So you kind of see this already in these, like, I call them like pop-up pro leagues, because they're just nothing is like really sticking. But where they, I think our travel team is playing Kansas City next weekend, and like a pro team is going to be there. So I think the vibe is kind of similar next year, that they're going to travel to these locations. But the following year, the idea from what I read in the press release is that they would have cities that they sit. So I think this was the intended plan all along with AU. I don't think it was through AU, from what I know, and what the structure at the time, not given COVID, what COVID sort of did to it, was that the NPF was going to stay in existence and lead into Athletes Unlimited. Athletes Unlimited was a way in that structure for them to end with this fun like championship series, to tack on more to the year, to offer more salary opportunities, more of a stage for things. And then COVID, the NPF failed at that time. They just went all in with AU. We got left with this, which we've talked about, the limitations. I went to games. I've referenced, like, I bring my son to games. I've had to tell them to like be quiet at times, because the games are so quiet, because it's like people don't, it's not, you don't have a team to cheer for. So like, yes, you're cheering for individual, and when something exciting happens, people cheer, but you're like, it's a interesting feel. And so I'm really excited. I think it's business people behind it who see the benefit of revenue, which you need. You can't just have like people out of the kindness of their heart making pro leagues. Like, that sounds cool, but that doesn't work. So I think like the revenues behind it, they already have ESPN deals for game coverage. Like, I saw that the base salary is $75,000. Like, I think there's a lot of, obviously we think they should make more than 75,000, but for that time period, that's a good base, I think, for where we're working with now. So I think it's really exciting. My hope is, and I'm not in the mix, but that they're going to buy up some of these other random teams that's in the works, and we can just put our energy into one cohesive league.
I think
really,
I think it's time. I think it's really good preparation for the 2028 games that our athletes here have the opportunity to play competitively here. It's always been baffling to me that we ship our players to Japan because they can make great money there, and there is competitiveness in that league. But then we come around the bend in the Olympics, and we those Japanese hitters have seen all of our pitching,
Right.
and they collect data just like anybody else does. And so I think it's a really good preparation for just like, give our athletes, our softball athletes here, opportunity to be competitive at the professional level, to like stay here, keep that competition here, so that it can be built from the inside, right?
Well, make the products better. Make the products better because they can train. I think this idea that I can make at a base 75,000 for that series, that I think what I understand it, I'm one of the best players. I can go make money in the Champions Cup or whatever they're calling it, the current AU structure that still will exist. I can get on endorsements on top of that, because I'm now playing in a real professional league. Like, it's a real salary.
Yeah.
That could be someone's real career. I don't have to coach on the side. I don't have to do this on the side. I don't have to go do this on the side. And with that becomes, I can put energy into being the best version of myself. And that makes the product better. And that matters. It's like, I saw someone kind of saying something almost negative about how long the World Series has gone. And I was like, this is the first 2 years that we've seen rested players at their freaking best on the stage. The product is better. The games are, that's why you're seeing that outfield. If those kids turn around and we're freaking exhausted and I played till 3 a.m., you're not going to see those outfield plays. You're not going to see those feats that makes the product
that
amazing.
Guy saying that, like, it's like, we need less of this. Like, who invited that guy into
Yeah. And so I think that there's, so I think that there's like we need softball and we need the product to be its best version. And you can't do that in the format you're in. You can't do that when you don't make a full salary. You can't do that if you're juggling 2 jobs to make it work. You can't do it. And so it's like, even though they're still amazing athletes, it's not knocking that. They aren't the best version of themselves. They're not putting the best product on the field. So that's what makes me excited. I just think AU in its current form and the sort of random pro teams, like, we've never given these women an opportunity for this to be their career. Yeah. And when you do that, what comes on the field is softball. There is not a better freaking sport than softball. Like, you can't tell, like, and it doesn't, it stands alone. It's its own sport. It's freaking amazing. People are doing ridiculous things out there. And like, but we just haven't been able to put that product fully in its best.
It's the right time. I think it's this collision in my mind of the culture of where women's sports are and the visibility of it. The collision of that with NIL deals where people like want softball to, like, they think like, I can go into college and continue it as my career. Like, I mean, this world of like starting in college, I can think about being a softball player as my career. And the Olympics, I think it's just this collision that coming back in the Olympics. We have met a lot of our college athletes who are training with us this summer, and I'll ask them, like, what are you going to do after you graduate? And they're like, I want to play for team such and such. It's not always USA, but I want to play for team such as in 2028. So like, you know, whatever I do, I've got to be able to stay connected to this. And they're making choices. Should I coach so that I can connect, be at a place where I have resources, I can do this. Yeah. They're literally making their career choices over the next 4 to 5 years based on how they can keep training to be.
It will be interesting for coaching. So, it will be interesting for coaching, because I think you will lose coaches, which is a good thing for our game. But it's, you know, it will be an element of like, you know, I don't really sit in this category where I think it's good when our very best players become coaches. Like, and it's not, maybe eventually, but when they in their prime become coaches, I don't think that's a good sign for the game. That my option as a 23-year-old who just won a World Series is that I go into coaching. Like, I don't think that that's a good sign. Now, when they're 38, 40, if they want, you know, they want to be Dawn Solly and get back to the game and go be a freaking amazing coach and be that, then that's great. But we don't want to see that at younger ages. So I hope, you know, I think the game will have to deal with it, but I hope that we lose some of them.
That though. I mean, so I think that's the reality. There's not been another option. So it's been like either get out of the game or stay in and coach. So it's the right time. I think it's like it's set up for success because of the collision in my mind of all 3 of those things. And it's really exciting.
I'm looking forward to the rise of the support systems. Like, you can put 4 teams together with all the best players, but like at a certain point, they're all the best players. And the competitive edge is going to be, how do you prepare them? How do you train them? How do you manage them? How do you keep them, as you said, Krista, feeling their best? And so like, I am looking forward to the rise of, you know, actual player development inside a pro level softball league, and all of the, like, the resources that are going to come along with that and the investment, because that's going to be your competitive edge.
Right.
You put
if you're
4
the
teams
Chicago
together,
team, you try to figure out how to be the best. What are our training resources? Do we need a minor league team? Like, you start having these real conversations about what it looks like, which is, you know,
and the make or break sometimes is just how your players are managed. You know, having the best team on the field is one thing, but like, if they're all physically exhausted or hurt or not tapping into what actually makes them the best at what they do, what are we doing?
Well, the current AU structure is fun, and it's a good setup for like betting, which I think like you could tap into. We know that's there's a lot of fun to it, but like, you gotta have
an all-star game. One's getting
gotta have and you gotta have a coach, and you gotta have a organization behind you with goals that are beyond the individual, even though you want these individual stars. Like, you have to. And so I still think the AU model is cool in its original intended form. So I'm excited to go back to that, which is like, now it would be cool. Like, I picture in like baseball, if you like at the end of it, the baseball season, which wouldn't work with how long the baseball season is, but if it was a little shorter and at the end of it, it was like all the best players go battle it out in this crazy, you know, that'd be cool. So I think that structure is cool when you, and now
all-star game.
Right. And now I am loyal to the Chicago team. And so when I go to the AU, I have a totally different experience. I'm wearing a Chicago jersey with the Chicago represented player, and I'm going for that person. Like, you've created a totally different buy-in to even the current AU model, where I have some loyalty behind. It's not just like a random game I'm going to. So I think it's awesome. I'm super excited. Like I said, let's make one league now. So that would be the next step, is none of the other
follow our
things.
efforts.
Let's just say, this is the path. Let's follow one path so we can get more people investing. I remember I watched the Angel City documentary, and one of the things when they were considering starting Angel City as an expansion team, one of the things they really like that had to be a big part of their funding was the viability of the league. Is it going to stay? Because every women's league, and softball is still in much more turnover and builds than some of the other leagues. That's where we are. So the WNBA has been steady for a while. So now it's at a space where, investors feel comfortable that the league is going to stay,
right,
that the product they're building is going to stay.
That there's a return on that investment. That's what they want.
Yeah. The NWSL was right on the cusp of the sort of like age range when all these expansion teams are starting, of like, do we think is this the league?
Yeah.
Is this the league? And so you just can't have conversations with people with money like that, which you need, whether we want it or not. And you can't have conversations with people if they're nervous that like in 2 years, this team is gone. This league is going to be shot. So one, I think AU, the fact that their current model has sort of stood this test of time of a few years is great. And then it's like, we can't have all these other like competing interests. If we're going to do it, we need our pro league to be this steady force. It's got to be steady. It's got to be the product. It can't be this startup. Like, it's just, you don't get the same kind of funding with that. So, it's a really important part. It's just time for it to be just like it's got to be constant and steady. So, all right, I'm really going to change this up here because it's time for our Jordy question. Our dear Jordy, she is the pitching coach now at Purdue, worked for us for a few years, 3 years, is a dear friend of ours. And, our question's been in the hopper for a bit because I was like, this is she gave us a tough one. And so I had to find it, and I was like, oh shoot, she sent us this in April. So it's been a minute. But give me a second. I'm going to play it.
Hi, Krista, Ashley, and Laura. My question somewhat pertains to what Trisha at Texas A&M asked on your guys' first episode about pitch counts and youth softball, and understanding that there is no systems in play yet for youth softball pitchers, and knowing that they will throw high volume, high intensity 9+ months out of the year. As college coaches, what is it that we should look for then in the recruiting process as far as healthy pitchers, good patterns, almost like health risks while we're recruiting? If those pitchers don't have data available, and then B, if they do have data available, whether it's Rapsodo, some other type of ball flight tech, whether they go to training 3 to 4 times a week, what is it that we should ask of their coaches? What are good questions in the recruiting process that we should ask their trainers? What data should we be looking at? Specifically knowing that they might be super tired in the middle of summer, all of a sudden they're throwing 60 instead of 65 as we've seen them, rather than cross them off a list. What are the questions that we should ask? And then again, without data, what is it that we should look for, knowing that they're going hard 9+ months out of the year? Thank you guys. I miss you, and it's awesome that you're doing this podcast.
Jordy.
Just a few questions.
Just a few. That's a good one.
Yeah.
But basically, it is one
really
question of like, how should we frame recruiting, knowing that athletes we're just seeing an exhausted version of them all the time.
Yeah. Well, and we see a lot of athletes who get recruited, verbally committed, and have this huge drop off. And I think that's the other thing is like, can we anticipate that drop off? What questions should we be asking people to either avoid that drop off, or what happens when it happens? I think, I always remember, we have a couple examples of this, because the more freaky your ball flight, the more likely you are that you're getting that from weird ways. And there was a pitcher, it's not appropriate to get into but we were playing on a big stage. She was a senior. I was watching her throw, and I said, my brother and I were watching it together, and he had a pocket radar, and I said, like, get out the pocket radar and tell me what velo she throws every inning. So the first inning she threw like 65 and then 62, and by the third or fourth inning she was throwing like 56. And I said, this kid had freakish ball path. It was up. I think probably some up and almost like arm side, or the way she angled it at least made it feel like it was coming up. And it was definitely freakish, but I could see with my eye, just because we see it so much, like her patterns are super inefficient. And, you know, she's, if not already dealing with injuries, because I didn't know the kid is going to deal with injuries. And so like, you definitely should take her at a high level, because this is not ball flight people see very often. But you have to know what you're bringing this kid on as, which is probably that she'll never be able to be the kid that we're talking about now that throws any game after game after game in the World Series. Like, it's just probably not going to happen. And I talked to her college coach. She was already committed, and it wasn't a negative, like, don't take this kid. But I was like, this is a college coach that kind of knows us. And she was like, oh, no, she's fine. Like a month into going to college, she had like a stress fracture and things like that. So I just think this is a real thing that we know is true. I think it's probably not different. Like, yes, we could talk about the softball stuff. Like, there's a bunch of softball issues with workload, and we can't ignore that. But also, like, the more elite you get, the more you're asking of your body. It's, you know, there's some level that this happens at everything. Like in baseball, look at all of the UCL things. Look at all of the, like, these are freak people doing freak things with their body, you know, like when you get to be an outlier, you're pushing some risk there. So, but there's some common things we see of like, it's not about not taking the kid, but it's about, you are going to have to manage her. And in my mind, what you're asking of her college or of her, you know, coaches and trainers now is that they also understand that they need to probably start managing her so that it's not too late for you to manage her. Right. I guess is what I would kind of say. So kind of knowing that, but that's just my take from out in the travel ball world. But yeah. Obviously, yeah.
I think the first question is asked, like, what role are you asking of this athlete? Traditionally, everything's been about, we're looking for the ace. Like, basically, our game is only built off of aces. Our game has been built off of the kid that can throw. What now we're like, she has a curve, and then she has a screw, and then she has a ride, she has a drop, and she has a change of speed, and she has all this stuff. And do those pitchers exist out there? They do still. We have pitchers out there that produce a ton of variability. So if what you're going after is that I want a kid who is taking a ton of innings because she throws hard and she produces a lot of different stuff, so I think that she's going to take a lot of innings for us, she's going to be sort of this like ace concept, then you have to look into pattern efficiency, because this is the world that you're living in. Then she might have the tools to be like fill this ace bucket for you, but her patterns are, and we know with our eye, just like, oh, it looks really like she's putting a lot of stress on her body. There's a lot of inefficiency, maybe her neck position, how she has to put the brakes on with knee extension, maybe what her arm path looks like. There's a variety of things that you can see there's like inefficiency there. Then what you're probably dealing with are like what the questions you want to ask are like what her health history has been, because likely she might be able to keep that level of variability, but she can't log the ace innings because of that level of efficiency. To log the ace innings really means you have to have some standardized level of efficiency in your motion. Not perfect, not optimal, but some baseline level of efficiency. You might be lower in velo with poor patterns, right? So like there's different ways to build this like ACE concept, if you will. But so you really got to kind of understand that. Higher velo, lower efficiency patterns are a recipe for pain, injury, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's really about understanding.
Would you say that in the current way that we've taught pitching, that people who have moderate to clean efficiency, for and have made it to the level they are at, are high velo bullet kids?
Do I think that people with more moderate or high velo bullet kids?
Like who has, in our current systems, was what we've sort of like built, because we haven't understood break and how it's made.
Yeah.
Is that we have kids who produce freakish break, but they have some inefficiencies, or we have kids who, you know, they have sort of more standard patterns, but because of the traditional way we've taught those standard patterns, if they've made it on this stage with those patterns, that they're just high velo bullet kids.
Yeah, that's probably right. I don't know that for sure. But essentially, I think what you're asking and what you're getting at is that we assume that better mechanics equals better performance. And oftentimes what you're saying is what leads to something out of the ordinary, something more like special in ball flight is because of a weird compensation or strategy they tap into. So a breakdown in patterns, they tap into some weird. It is more difficult to have really, really great ball flight from a super clean, healthy arm slot. That's just so difficult to achieve. And so, yes, probably these like super high efficiency. And I don't think we really see a lot of high efficiency. I honestly think the motion is way too complicated and we start it too young. We're really looking at, is it low or is it just like moderate? And moderate is like, okay, there's some baseline things, but it's unlikely. It impacts performance a little bit more than it impacts your health and wellness. And low is like you're at increased risk for. I think we kind of like quantify, what would lead to someone having low, moderate, or high efficiency and one time ever. And all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of assessments that we've done, one time ever, I felt comfortable, giving her the score of moderate to high efficiency. It's usually low to moderate, or just moderate. And it's like you're not getting enough from the body, but it's not necessarily putting your other parts of, your levers, your other segments of the body at in compromised positions. So what I would say is you're just really asking what the role is. If you're like, I need a big down ball pitcher and you have a 62 mile per hour big sink pitcher and she has poor patterns to do it, it probably won't matter. Like, I think that's the biggest thing is like, you have to ask yourself what you're going after. If she is really weird, this kid is like this weird arm side, kind of like funky velo, super weird backspin, multiple speeds through the zone, you better believe it's going to come from low efficiency patterns, essentially. But you're not going to get a kid like that and put her in the ace bucket. So that also might not matter. The thing that we run into is having single buckets. We're very narrow-minded. So we have this single bucket of what it looks like to be a pitcher. The number of pitchers recently that have come through these doors and they have this freakish, weird backspin. We've had some kids with some freakish arm side run, weird multi-speed, multi-level backspin. And every time they say, my college coach said I don't throw hard enough. It's like, that's not who that kid is, and she's never going to tap into 68. So we have a very narrow mind of what it looks like to recruit a pitcher. She's got to be freaking big. She's got to be strong. She's got to throw 68. She has to have a rise ball. She has to have a drop ball. Like, we have this super narrow mind bucket. And then we also have this like narrow mindedness or this one bucket approach to like how we train pitchers and how we like their workload. If like they all follow the same regimen, they all throw the same in preparation. It's like, well, the ace who's logging all the innings needs to maybe work differently than the kid who's coming in to just like close an inning. So we struggle to understand that. I think we're getting there. This is definitely a topic that I'm excited to talk about at Pitch Doc, because we have at this point a lot of information we've gotten to the point where we've talked about go for the down ball, go for the up ball kid. Now your staff needs a lefty. And that's great. It's great because it's getting us out of the mindset of recruiting a single kid to do all the things. It's still an elementary view of what we actually need to go for. It's understanding the kid's role, how much you think you're going to use her, and then also what her level of pattern efficiency looks like, and is it going to be difficult to use her in that manner? There's other layers to it. So that's what I would say. I'm not sure that really answers Jordy's question, but what I would say is you have to identify. We can't just say low efficiency patterns are bad. They are the majority out there. You just have to really understand what you're asking, what you're going to be asking of that pitcher based on the tools that she produces. And then is it going to matter? And if it is going to matter, I'm not saying don't go after the pitcher that throws 68 in travel ball or 66 in travel ball, which is probably going to be like 71 in college when she's not freaking exhausted, right? So it's like she's throwing 68 in travel ball and, she looks like she's got something up. She also can keep something down a little bit, but her patterns are weird. You just have to go into that knowing like we're going to have to put a ton of work into keeping her healthy in order to maintain that, right? So as long as you know those things, I think just like we have to see the motion differently. It's just so cookie cutter in recruiting, in training, in development. It's so cookie cutter. And frankly, this is a good topic for me at this point. It's really been firing me up lately because I have had a lot of college athletes here in tears over these last couple of weeks because they're so misunderstood. There's this world where they are weird. They get so many swings and misses because they have funky tools. They got recruited for those tools. Now they get to campus, and because they throw 62, they've always thrown 62. Let me be clear about that. They got recruited as that. They got swings and misses off of that. They were successful as that. They got recruited. They get there and they're like, you don't throw hard enough. You can't pitch here. It's like, right. What the hell changed? So now they're like, I'm not good enough. I'm like, no, there's this, you have the same stuff. You're just wildly misunderstood. No one understands what made you effective or successful then. You're the same now. And they're like, oh no, because it's a very one way approach, cookie cutter approach to like what it needs to look like if you're in the Power 5 or if you're in this. So we need to expand our mindset with that. And like I said, I'm over the like, a couple years ago, 2 years ago, it was this huge article when Lonnie was like, I throw with a staff and I think about workload with that staff and I break it up. And then I also think one kid has up and the other kid has down. That like shook the game, that mindset. Yep. It's great. I'm not like, it's simply not enough. It is simply not enough. So now we take, this approach of like, as long as I have a lefty, I have a down ball, and if an up ball kid, I'm good. It's like, not really, because there's so much more to that. There's so many more things of like what it's going to take capacity wise to keep that kid where she's at. So that would be what I would say. Identify your buckets and then understand what are her hurdles in order to be able to fill that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Laura.
I wrote down 5 questions. I wrote down 5 questions. 1, I didn't want to forget them, but 2, I wanted to make sure I could map them out. My first question is, what is the strength and conditioning background? What's her training age? That's my first question. Because we've had pictures where, we'll say, what is your strength and conditioning background? They're like, I did some school workouts, but really the first time I was in the weight room was when I got to college. And like, I call that puberty 2.0. It is a major change to their body parameters. If they are adding mass, because this is the first time they've been in a strength and conditioning program, you have to know to manage that as the pitching coach, right? So if you're expecting her to grow and to change, she's going to do that, but you got to know if you're taking away things that are what make her special. So what is her training age from a strength and conditioning standpoint? Does she have habits built in around herself as an athlete that include taking care of her body outside of the circle, right? And to me, that's through strength and conditioning. That is through, just the habits that she's built. My next question is about health, obviously. I think we have a weird culture around hiding injuries and high profile recruits and not being open about that. And we've had some difficult conversations with athletes who, have been on this journey and have gotten injured in these really pivotal times where recruiting is big. And, we try to talk them through, how do you talk to a coach? How do you let them know that? And I don't believe in hiding it. I don't believe in hiding it. And I think we have to have more open conversations about that. It's something you're going to have to manage as her college pitching coach. So knowing her health history, it's part of the game, right? And so I think that's half the battle. The other question I'm asking, particularly after a verbal commit, is, do you play other sports? And I know I have sometimes a very complicated opinion about this, but I think of it goes into my second question. It's like, what are your habits to protect yourself? Are you protecting your own investment? Are you protecting my investment in you as the college pitching coach? I'm not going to tell you don't play other sports, but I think that there is a very clear question of if you are a high, I don't even care high level, if you are a top recruit, if you recruit at all playing softball at the college level, you've really got to think about protecting your body. You have to think about protecting your body, especially in this world now where, NIL and your ability to be on the field are connected, and being on the field means being healthy. And so I want to know if she plays other sports. I want to know if she actually has a true off season, and what does that look like? And then my last 2 questions are related. Do they have habits to protect themselves? Are they putting up boundaries about their physical capacity, or, how they get into the gym to train? They take care of their injuries. They know their boundaries. And my last question would be, does the travel organization and or high school they come from, do they work to preserve that kid as much as possible? Right. And recognize that their moment of time in that travel organization, yes, we want to win. We want to, give the athletes a positive experience. But if they get so burnt out because they are so overused by their travel organization, what good is it to recruit from that travel organization? Because then they come to your campus and they are not the version of themselves that you need them to be. And they're harder to manage, because all they've known is just go, 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 go. And now they have all these resources in strength and conditioning and mental performance and nutrition and sports medicine services. And they're like, I'm just me, I've always done it this way. And so pivoting them on these habits of how do I take care of myself? Those are my questions, is how do you take care of you? Because that's going to let me know when you come to campus as a freshman, what are some of those habits we might have to undo a little bit? And if your training age is low in the weight room, we got to know that's going to be a factor for how your patterns might change and how your ball flight might change as a result of that.
Yeah. I was
going
thinking.
to add really quickly,
ahead.
Krista, then I have to duck out and then come right back. I got to check on something out here at the facility. But I was going to add really quickly, those are amazing questions. And also you should assume that the answers to all of them are going to be like,
Terrible.
X,
Terrible.
X.
Right.
So also then keep in mind that what you're seeing of that kid is a very depleted version of herself, an
Bingo.
undertrained, overworked. So that's what Jordan is getting at when it comes
Yep.
to this, like, when it comes to this element of like what we're seeing out there. And so you have to see beyond the immediate performance there, because you can ask those questions. And eventually I hope we get to a world where there's going to be like, this is what this looks like. And this is how we've managed her workload. And she's been educated about when to stop multiple sports and when to do that. Like, you should know those answers. And also assume that right now, when you ask those questions, they're all gonna be like, no, huh? What? Huh? So in reality, know that they're all undertrained, overworked, and out there. What you're seeing is a shell of what that kid can ultimately become, most likely.
Yeah. I was going to say next week, this will be a topic. I'll write it down, because where my brain went was we got to get rid of the labels. We have to start thinking of pitch shapes and pitch speeds. And when we start thinking about that, we can start building staffs in a more like holistic mindset. That's not just like down, up, side, whatever. I always think of one of the pictures I had through that, off speed rise, and everyone would be like, sit on the change. Why can't you sit? Like yelling in travel ball. And I was like, cause it's not a change that they're used to seeing. So there's an element of the shape of the pitch also that you need to understand. And the more shapes and speeds you can throw at a team, the more that they have to overcome. And so what you're asking is like, what speed mix and what shape can beat this team based on their swings? And that's what you're trying to throw at them. So we'll talk about this next week, because I think there's something really interesting of like, we had all these pitch labels and we're like, except no one throws those pitches. But to really be effective as a player and as a staff, you do want lots of pitch labels. You want to start labeling, okay, this is this type of down. This is this speed of down. This is this type of up. This is this. It's why now in baseball, MLB, you're seeing like the swerve and the, splinker and the, it's like there's like, there was a splitter, but now that people can create a different shape of that version pitch. And they do have more and more and more labels. And we see that all the time in our assessments. We see a kid that says they have 8 pitches and they all look the same, but we also see lots of different pitch profiles. And as a hitting coach, that's what you're preparing your hitters for, is all those different shapes of pitches coming at you and speeds. Yeah. And so I think I'm going to put this down to talk about next week, but when you're building a staff, you're trying to build a plethora of speeds and shapes coming from different angles. That's how you're going to mess up hitters, because now as a hitting coach, I have to not just prepare for down. I can prepare for down. I have to prepare for down with this run and from this angle and at this speed, and up from this angle at this speed. And I have to prepare for all of those things, which is how, as Ashley's saying, you can use the 62 low velo freak up kid, because that's a different thing you're throwing at them. Now she has arm side run. That's a different thing you're throwing at them. You can throw it down with some horizontal run. That's a different thing. You can hold vertical. And now as a hitting coach, I'm like, well, we can't prepare for all this, so we're screwed. And I can prepare for the one thing. I can always prepare for the one thing. So
and when you have,
I think it would be interesting
when you have freshmen like Rothrock and like Kavan that just, they are so dominant right now. They're going to have to do something different next year. And so you need pitchers that are adaptable, that can create adaptation. They've been seen, a million times this season. So it's like, not only are those hitters in the moment, maybe are prepared because they've seen each of them so frequently, but if there's nothing that changes about fooling those hitters in the next season, because their patterns are so locked, they're rigid, they have, there isn't an opportunity to create an evolution of that, then there's the same version. Yeah. Right. And so,
I would say maybe not, if what they throw is freakish enough that hitters can't adjust to it, which does happen.
Sure.
The Justin Verlanders of the world, they don't reinvent themselves every year. They have something so freakish they can throw it all the time and it still beats hitters. And we have that freaking information. So if that's what Tegan throws, or that's what Kennedy throws, and we know that hitters cannot adjust to, when bullet gets over this velo, hitters can't adjust to it. If you can control it, it's too hard right now. We have that info. Pitch stock is going to be out there, but we have the info of like, okay, but what puts someone over the threshold where we just haven't seen hitters adjust to that? It's just beyond a hitter's capability. That does exist. Then you don't need to reinvent yourself. Throw that freakish thing over and over and over, and it's going to win. But if you are, you only have this thing, and we know that only hitters eventually they figure that out. If I saw 8 inches down at 62, I could go set the machine on that, and I know a hitter could adjust to that. I, as a hitting coach, believe that statement to be true. I can maybe, though, what I didn't practice in hitting practice is first facing a kid that throws 61 plus 5, and then facing a kid that throws 62 minus 8, and then facing a kid that now that is harder to prepare for, right? Mm-hmm. But we do probably know that there's a threshold. Kennedy, as an example, let's understand really what Nija's throwing that's pushing where, like, it doesn't matter if hitters know this is coming. This is something hitters, we just never have seen them adjust to. It's too fast. It's holding the shape too much. And now that she threw a changeup, I guess she did kind of reinvent herself, but now she's throwing a changeup on top of it. And it's like, forget that. I can't touch that. We have that info. So come listen to that pitch talk and then be a better hitting coach too.
Data. So what Jordan was asking is, like, if you don't have data,
if
you don't have data, what I would say is, like, then patterns are going to matter.
To get data.
If you're putting her, but if you're putting her in the category of she needs to be the ace, she's taking the workloads. What we have seen has been a catastrophe. I will say it's like catastrophic for some athletes, is they are actually the role of weird, funky,
and they're trying to be
something different. And then they get recruited and they get a full boat, a full ride, because they get at like a mid-tier or mid-major level. And so they take that route. And financially, maybe that was the best route, but they're the ace at that route, but they're actually a really inefficient, weird, freakish ball flight kind of kid. And the injury, pain, dysfunction cycle is just consumes their whole career, because that's never the role they really were meant to be in. So I think without data, then just to be able to understand is the kid she looks weird. And because of that, she throws something funky. It's not this like super traditional high velo, like there's something funky about that kid. Don't worry if her patterns are bad. You just can't put her in the ace bucket, I think it's just like understanding that. And if you're seeking an ace bucket, whatever that looks like to you, it's high velo, it's a little bit of both, it's something, then cleaner patterns is more likely. And if she doesn't have clean patterns, then just know that it's going to take effort to keep her in the ace bucket. That's all, right? Like, I think that's my sort of like summary. Yes, the data is amazing and that's going to push the game forward, but for average coach who's not going to be educated on that or not going to fully understand that,
does it look easy? Does what she's looking look easy? I mean, the eye test, does it look easy breezy for her to doing it? If it does, she's probably not doing something. And so then, is it working? Does it look easy breezy and it's working? That might be an ace kid, like is she checking the boxes you need to? Does it not look easy? Does it look a little, that something about that's weird, but it's working? Then
it's what
take
I've always
her,
loved
but
about,
take her as a role.
Before Riker worked for us, what I've always loved about him, he has such a great eye. We actually just did a Redefine the Circle podcast together about this concept of like the category when you're recruiting. What are the like buckets you put people in? How do you go after them? Whatever. So that's a great episode coming soon. But that's what he's always done a great job of. He's been able to identify like, one, can I make that athlete? She's not that great yet, but she's kind of like good patterns. So I know she can have a lot of adjustability. The ball flight's not there yet, but I can help her tap into that because there's a base there that's going to allow me to do more with her. Or like, that is all kinds of funky and weird and I like it. So I'm not going to change that about her. She's going to play a very particular role and she's going to look weird doing it. And it's okay that she looks weird doing it because, we don't need her to overthrow.
Right. You're not going to have a sidearm pitcher be the ace.
Exactly.
And when has any sidearm pitcher ever been an ace? That's not real.
Yeah,
they
we
serve
only
a
know
weird
ace
role.
Mindset.
Yeah.
Like, going all the way back to like watching some of these big games in the World Series and the commentary of like, you see, now that's her drop ball. Now that's her rise. Now that's her curve. That's her screw. It's like, we only know how to see great pitchers as they throw hard and they have everything. It's like, there's probably 3 people out there who can do that. Maybe, probably 2, 1. I don't know. No,
0.
Yeah. It's just like, there might be 0, but like we are talking about like, that's not what we're looking at here. So it's just reminding ourselves of that. Reminding ourselves of those buckets and how efficiency plays a role in those.
Damn, Jordy, I left even extra room and we still went way over. Good question.
Good question. All right. Love you, Jordy. I miss you too.
See you on the road, hopefully, recruiting, and then we'll look at the buckets together. All right. Yeah. Well, good question, good episode. Until next week, where we're going to talk about pitch shapes because I actually think it's a really good topic, and I think it merges pitching and hitting. Yes, pitching and hitting together. It's like, how do you prepare? How do you, they're making pitchers over here are trying to beat us in these ways, and here's how you would have to combat it. It's a really interesting combo. And the more you can throw, the harder it is, obviously, to prep, right? So, that's the concept. And it's also why I just put the freaking data out there, and then who cares? Let them prep and then throw more shit at them. You can't prep for everything. So, all right. Good episode. Until next week.